in English. Pro means for, as opposed to anti, which means against. Do you understand? So when you say prophecy, you're saying something that is for light. Something for giving light. And remember, we need light because it is dark. But now when you put on a light, people say, we can now see. Do you understand? All right. Now, the most profound darkness we have is not the physical one. It's when the mind is dark. Are we together? And what is interesting is that the way in which we light up a dark mind, we don't switch on this light. Because no matter how many lights are on, if there is darkness in the mind is still dark. Are we together? So how does God get light in a darkened mind? He sends prophets with the word of truth. Because according to the Bible, God is light. 1 John, those of you who want to check, chapter 1, verses 5 and 6. God is light. So prophecy is something that is a characteristic of God in which he can illuminate a space that is dark, or in which he can switch on a light in a space which is dark. Does that make sense? Therefore, the book of Revelation is a prophetic book, meaning to say, its intention is to switch on lights where it is dark. Does that make sense? All right. Then the last thing I wanted to say before I get into the passage is, there is two sides to prophecy. Remember I said two sides, so there's 1, 2. The first side is simply this. When God speaks, he always illuminates, he always switches on the light. Always. It does not matter what he has said. Are we together? So meaning to say, what I am doing currently, according to the definition of the word prophecy, I am prophesying because I am assigned to use God's word of prophecy to share some things with you. Every time somebody stands behind a pulpit with the Bible, they are fulfilling a prophetic function because they are God's spokespeople. Do you understand? That's part 1. The second part is the one that fascinates most people, but it's not as important as this one because it is a subset of this one. Second part is the fascination with the future. What's going to happen tomorrow? If you notice, as I am speaking to you, I am dark about what's going to happen in the next minute. That's totally dark to me. I do not know what's going to happen tomorrow. I don't know what's going to happen next year. Are we together? But we serve a God who is sitting today while he is sitting tomorrow, and he is sitting yesterday at the same time. So for human beings, we are only privy to what is happening now, and we are aware of what has happened in the past. But it is totally dark to us what's going to happen when? Tomorrow. And therefore God sometimes uses his divine privilege of being enlightened to cast a light into the future, to tell us before the future happens, this is what you need to expect tomorrow. Do you understand? And that is the second aspect about prophecy. So most of us, when we hear the word prophecy, we're always thinking, it's that type of writing in the Bible that deals with what? The future. Not necessarily so. Prophecy is everything that God has to say. So meaning to say, this is a prophetic book, the whole of it. Are we together? But we are especially curious about those parts about the future because we do not know what's going to happen tomorrow. Does that make sense? Now, Revelation chapter 7, when it was written, people estimate it was written about 1900 years ago, 1900 years ago. John wrote about stuff that was going to happen from then, are we together, up to the time when Jesus comes, meaning to say, beyond our date. And yet he died shortly after finishing writing that book. Do you follow what I'm saying? So you can imagine somebody as a human being who lived 1,900 years ago, writing details about what's going to happen 1,900 years later and beyond. And he has since died, but we are still reading his book today, and some of the things he has written have not yet happened. Okay. Prophecy. Mama, am I still moving with you? Aha. Okay. If that is clear, let me now get into the few points I wanted us to touch on and then open the floor for us to talk about prophecy. Okay, by the way, this is a convenient one. Hey. Now I want to put it on the side. I wanted us to get a background. By the way, more than 75% of what you get in the book of Revelation is repetitions of things that you'll find in the Old Testament. In other words, there are some fellowships, people who meet to worship using the Bible, who will tell you because Jesus died, we do not necessarily need the Old Testament. And when they get to the book of Revelation, they say, hey, this one, is too what? Too dark. Don't worry about it. Just worry that Jesus saves. Amen. And people go, amen. And then they don't even read the book of Revelation. But you notice the name of the book, Revelation. In other words, something is in the dark and I reveal it. How could God put a book to reveal stuff, and some of our pastors are telling us it is too complicated for us to understand? In other words, why don't we continue sitting in the dark, yet we've been given what? A light. It doesn't make sense. In other words, as soon as we've read the book of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John to understand the story of Jesus, it only makes sense to go to the book of Revelation before we can even read the letters of Paul. If you check Revelation chapter 1, verse 1, could you read it? Because just Revelation chapter 1, verse 1.
The revelation of Jesus Christ,
yes,
which God gave unto him,
yes,
to show unto his servants,
yes,
things which must shortly come to pass.
yes,
He sent and signified
yes,
it by his angel
yes,
unto his servant.
exactly. Did you hear that? It's the revelation of Jesus Christ. In other words, if the Jesus Christ who saves sends a light in his salvation, why would a sinner prefer to sit in the dark? It does not make sense. All right? It just doesn't make sense. So I'm just going to go into the Old Testament briefly and then come back to Revelation 7, then open the floor for discussion. So could we open the following sections in the Bible? The first area is Genesis chapter 30. All right? I wanted us to appreciate the background to Revelation chapter 7. Genesis chapter 30. You are there?
30.
Yes, 30. Not 13. 30. Yeah, English is not my mother. So my pronunciation is, it's okay to double check exactly what I've said. Yes. Genesis chapter 30. All right. I want us to note that as he was reading from Revelation chapter 7, if you're not paying attention and you're listening to the breakfast in your stomach, as he keeps reading, you end up falling asleep because he keeps repeating the same thing. So many sealed, 12,000. So many sealed, 12,000. Are we together? You know that repetition. Okay. But that repetition is actually necessary because it's emphatic. It's rooted in the history of Israel, literal Israel, which is significant for spiritual Israel. So even if he keeps repeating it like that, it is necessary. So I'm going to repeat those names, right? So just quickly check through your Bible to make sure that you're moving with me. All right? In fact, starting from chapter 29 is verse 31. We are not going to read everything because we won't have time to discuss. All right? When the Lord saw that Leah was not loved, chapter 29, verse 31, he opened her womb. Who was her firstborn? Reuben. And I just want us to list those names as we get them in Genesis chapter 30. All right? Reuben. Reuben is the first one. Okay. Then if you go to verse 33, who was the second born? Simeon. I just want you to confirm in your Bible so that you don't say he said. You should be able to see it in your Bibles. Are we together? Okay. After Simeon, verse 34. Levi. Do you see Levi there? The third born of Leah. And then verse 35. Who was the fourth born? Judah. We're moving together. Okay, then when we get to chapter 30, we discover that Rachel was jealous. So she decided, why don't I do what politicians do best? If I can't produce results, let me manufacture them. That's exactly what she did. Are you together? So she sent a representative to sire children for her. All right? What verse is that? Verse 6. Who was the firstborn by proxy? It's Dan. You see that? The next one.
Sorry?
Chapter 30, verse 6. 30. Genesis 30, verse 6. Yes, 30, verse 6. Right at the end of verse 6, she named him what? Dan. Do you see that? Verse 6. And then verse 7. And then verse 8. At the end of verse 8, who was the next one? Naphtali. All right. And verse 11, the end of verse 11, Leah decided, oh, she is being political. I'm going to be political also because while she was active, there was no results. All right. She decided, you know what? Let me also send a representative. So now Jacob is thinking, ooh, what have I gotten into? I thought I had 2 wives. Now I have to deal with 4 women. Okay. I'm saying this very deliberately. It might sound funny, but in the humor of it thereof is a deep spiritual lesson. So she also sent a representative. Who was the next one? Gad. All right? Via representation, okay? I'm not sure if it was proportional or not, but that's not the point. Verse 13. Asher. Do you notice that some of these names are familiar from Revelation chapter 7? Most of them, in fact. Okay. Then, that issue of mandrakes, they decided, you know what, since we're Adventists here, why don't we check with Brother Sia about fertility and what have you got? So they went and looked for Brother Sia. We recommended, why don't you use mandrakes so that you can start producing results? Are we together? And then the interesting thing is, despite they are using mandrakes, verse 17 says, God heard what Leah asked, and he opened her womb again. So the mandrakes had nothing to do with it. Okay. Did you follow where I'm going? Yeah. In other words, while we appreciate the bug and the herbs, healing comes from the great physician. Really. In other words, we are the people who appreciate herbs in light of the fact that there is a master behind them, God in heaven, the great physician. I enjoy myself when I go through the book of Genesis. No, don't forgive me. Even if you don't forgive me, it's fine. All right. Then it's verse 18. Leah, yes, Issachar. Okay. Did you see Issachar, right? Yeah. Right. And then you've got verse 20. Zebulun. Okay. Yes. And then who's the next one? Then I need to choose a different color here, because you've got the rose amongst the thorns. Right. And it had to be red. All right. Okay. And then after Dinah, who happened to be a girl, and she was the only one that came into Jacob's family or Israel's family. All right. Then eventually that wily politician gave birth eventually, Rachel. Okay. And she named the son Joseph. That famous chap. All right. Who made Egypt famous. I actually discovered through my readings that the excellence in the Egyptian civilization, you know, people who study ancient civilizations, the Mayans, the Egyptians, you follow all those ancients, the Chinese, are we together? When Egypt was at its apex, you'll find Joseph sitting right there at the top. Okay. All glory to God. Okay, but that's a story for another day. All right. Okay. Then there's a bit of a lull in the book of Genesis about the children of Jacob. A lot of drama happens. He wrestles with God. He goes back. Are we together? Returns to Bethel. Okay. And then in chapter 35, there's a sweet, sour experience. Genesis chapter 35. All right. You remember what happened? Genesis 35, verse 18. Let's read that one. As she breathed her last, this is Rachel, for she was dying, she named her son Benoni. Are you familiar with the suburb of Benoni in Joburg? Benoni, all right? But his father named him Benjamin. And those are the children of Jacob, the children of Israel. Are we together? Okay. Now, before I move on to the next reference and then back to, okay, I wanted us to note that the children of Israel include one lady. Okay. But every time we are dealing with prophecy and the history of the children of Israel, she does not feature anywhere. Are we together? Okay. And there's one simple reason. When God created man, Adam, he locked Eve away in the person of Adam. And when Eve had to come out, he took her out of Adam. He did not go back to the soil. Are you following? It's not necessarily that she does not feature. She may not have been mentioned after this. Are we together? But at the end of the day, God's way of dealing with humanity is that at a heavenly level, he deals with us through Christ. When he says Christ, he's done with all of us. Remember yesterday's presentation? At the cross was our representative. I was at the cross because I was on his mind. So when God the Father wants to deal with humanity, he deals with Christ. And he has dealt with all 7 billion of us through one man, Jesus Christ. Okay, I want that to sink. Now, when it comes to a home setup in the home, when God needs to deal with the home, he will deal with the father in the home, and he's dealt with everybody. That doesn't mean the lady is irrelevant. No, he is aware. The lady is his better half, you know, the way we put it in the English language. So when he deals with her better half, he has also dealt with her because he has got a certain order that he's got. And he, by virtue of his being consistent, he does not clash with his order. If he says it's this one who is in charge, that is the one who is going to be in charge, despite what the politicians are going to say. Just want us to appreciate. If you notice, all of these are males. All of them, they were boys. Remember that sick, okay? All of them. And then there was that one rose. Okay. But every time God talks about the children of Israel, he never mentions Dinah, because by virtue of her being a lady, she is included in the account. It's by default. You cannot discuss men and there's not a woman involved. The way the apostle puts it, 1 Corinthians chapter 1, and no, chapter 11, 1 Corinthians chapter 11, he will say, even though the man is the head, man is born of woman. In as much as I'm a man standing here, my mother is not a man. My mother is a lady. Are we together? But likewise, it takes a man to sire a woman into existence. It's the man who determines the sexuality of the lady. Do you notice how God does it? But then he is consistent by saying, I've assigned the male to be the head. His headship does not mean he is better than the lady. No. As he is heading, the woman is caught up in his head. She is included in that count. Right. And that's one of the problems that we have with Christianity, where certain men, you know, and they are walking around sanctimoniously, you know, looking pious with powerful beards like my brother, we're together in clerical collars and yes, but you know, and they discuss in those tones. And if you come in as a lady, you really feel irrelevant. Okay. But their own sex as males defies what they are doing, because by virtue of being males, the women are included in them, and yet they ignore the ladies as if they don't exist. I thought I should just sit on this one a little bit before it's on my way. It's just by the way. Are we together, my brother? Okay. Now, do you notice this list? This is according to the book of Genesis. I wanted us to appreciate yet another list. When the children of Israel have now left Egypt and are arriving in the land of Canaan, in the book of Numbers, chapter 1. The book of Numbers. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers is the fourth book in the Bible. Right, so you don't have to go far from the book of Genesis. The book of Numbers, chapter 1. Oh, no, okay. Should I use chapter 1? Yeah, it is chapter 1. Those of you who can skim fast, are we together? Note between verses 5 and 15, you've got a similar list. But I want to follow that same list starting from verse 20. Numbers 1, verse 20. And it reads in the same way in which it reads in the book of Revelation, except the numbers are different. From the descendants of who? Reuben, the firstborn. All men 20 years old or more who were able to serve in the army were listed by name, and their number was 46,500. Okay. I'm now switching. All right. Reuben. 46,500. Do you see that? Then verse 22 and 23, Simeon. What's the number? At the end of verse 23.
59,300.
59,300. Next one, Gad, verse 24. The number is in verse 25. 40 and 5,000.
650.
45,000.
Or it's 45 and 600. Sorry. Okay.
650.
And 50. Now, maybe you should just be helping me. You see the passage. What's the next one?
14,600.
Who's the...
That is Judah.
Which that's Judah, right?
Right. 3 score, 60.
Mm-hmm.
14,000.
Which is 74,600.
So in other words, it's 3 score and then we add 14,
14 is
which is 74.
1,600.
All right. Next one.
4,000.
Let's first of all mention the son,
Issachar.
Issachar.
Right.
Not a problem. How many?
54,400.
And 400.
54,400. Thank you. The next one,
Zebulun.
Zebulun.
57,400.
57,400.
400. Right. Next one,
Ephraim.
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 Yeah.
Okay.
14,000.
Some of you are noticing a bit of discord, so I'm going to highlight it. Ephraim. The number? 45.
40,500.
40,500. 40,500. Next one?
Manasseh.
It's another discordant one.
22,200.
20, 32,200.
Yeah.
Okay. Next one?
Benjamin.
Benjamin.
35,400.
35,400.
35,400. Next one?
Dan.
10. The number?
62,700.
Right. Next one?
Asher.
Asher.
41,500.
500.
Naphtali.
Naphtali.
53,400.
53,400. We should be getting to the last one. Is that the last one?
Yes.
Okay. That's the last one, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So, did you notice the discord? Discord, meaning to say, if these were the children of Israel, do you notice the difference in the list? The question is, if these are the children of Israel, where did this come from?
Those are the sons of Joseph.
Okay. Those are Joseph's sons. Okay. And sorry? Yes, you are noticing that Levi is somehow missing conveniently. Let me put him down there.
And Joseph.
You see that? Joseph is, this is represented. So let's just say this discord here is Joseph. Joseph's discord, you know what I'm saying? Then Levi somehow is missing. And the question is, why? All right? Okay? But before we answer the question, I wanted us to complete the list by going through the numbers in Revelation chapter 7. Okay? Let's just go through that list that the brother had read for us. The same list, the children of Israel. Okay? Let's see which verse. We're not going to read everything from verse 1, but I just want the list. From verse 5. Who's the top on the list? Judah. And if you notice, it does not matter who it is, the number is simply what?
Same.
Reuben.
And for the sake of time, I'm not going to be repeating the number. So that 12 represents all of them. Then who's the next one?
Reuben.
Reuben. Next one?
Gad.
Ah,
Asa.
Asher.
No.
Naphtali.
Manasseh.
Manasseh,
Right.
Simeon,
Simeon.
Levi.
Levi,
Didn't you just say Levi is missing?
Brought there.
Let's go on.
Issachar.
Issachar,
Issachar.
Zebulun,
Zebulun.
Joseph,
Did we say Joseph is represented? Yes. But now you notice he's on the list in Revelation 7. Right.
Benjamin,
Benjamin.
Dan.
But isn't there something wrong somewhere here? Remember, we're not discussing Dinah. I actually spent a lot of time on Dinah, so that is clear. In the story of all men, there's a woman. I don't care where we go, all right? Okay. Do you notice? What else do you notice? Maybe let me highlight this one. Somehow Ephraim is disappeared. Okay. What else do you notice?
Dan is missing.
Dan. Yes. I'm going to put 2 question marks with that one. All right. Based on my research, we're done. The rest of you can simply audit what I'm doing, just to double check. But according to Revelation 7, Ephraim and Dan are not in the count. Now we need to come here and answer this question first. In fact, this one first, that one second, and that one last. Then we discuss. All right?
Can I suggest as you go on, just on top of each column, can you put for us references for those maybe who would want to get references?
So this one is Genesis 29. What we started reading from verse something to what verse was it? I've forgotten the verse. Let me quickly check. Started from verse 32. Anyway, the story starts from verse 31 up to the end of chapter. Is it the end of chapter 30? No. Up to verse 24 of chapter 30. 29 verse 31 to 30 verse 24. Right. Then we skipped to also Genesis to get Benjamin. Is chapter 35, remember? Was it verse 14? Verse 18. It was verse 18. Because he was born much, much later. It's also Genesis. You simply put Genesis. But for his 12 siblings. That's the reference out here. Then over here is the book of Numbers. Chapter 1. Starting from verse 22. You were reading. What was the last verse dealing with Naphtali? Book of Numbers. And in fact, keep your fingers on the book of Numbers, because the second answer is going to come from the book of Numbers. Verse 43. It's chapter 1, verse 82, verse 43, right? Thank you. Verse 43. All right. But may I begin by responding to this one? You need to get to Genesis chapter 50 while you're keeping your fingers on Numbers. Genesis 50.
And the last column is.
Oh yes, Revelation 7. Oh, thank you, because we just complete Revelation 7, verses 5 to 8. All right. Verses 5 to 8. Okay. Let's quickly go to the book of Genesis. I found this fascinating when I went through it for myself. All right. No. I gave you the wrong references. Chapter 14. Is it 49? Yeah. No, 48. Because 49 is where you get the same list. Are we together? Chapter 49 is where you get the same list. But chapter 48 is what explains why Ephraim and Manasseh are in the camp. All right. Let me go directly to the verses that are concerned. All right. Verse 5. Yeah, let's read verse 5 and 6. Genesis chapter 48, verse 5 and 6.
Now your two sons who were born to you in the land of Mizraim, before I came to you.
Oh, you're using technology today.
And now thy two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, which were born unto thee in the land of Egypt, before I came unto thee into Egypt, are mine, as Reuben and Simeon, they shall be mine.
Did you hear that? Just before Israel died. You remember he had that traumatic experience. Joseph disappeared from his life for more than 15 years. And he was sure he's dead. And he was sure he will never see his grave. But there's always something, what we call closure, when you see the grave, where your heart is saying, yeah, he is buried here. Okay. The brothers told him, no, some wild animal ate him, and he's thinking now, I'm going to be looking for his bones in some animals. And I don't even know to which, you understand that trauma? Next thing is the trauma of discovering he's alive. Okay. I'm not sure which one was worse, but now that I've got children of my own, I think the second one was worse. When you see someone you thought was dead is actually still alive. And in fact, so alive that they're in charge of a country. Your head goes all over and you're thinking, and every day you wake up, my son, I thought you were dead, and you start crying all over again. I'm just trying to make you appreciate that trauma must have been worse than the first one of hearing that the son has died. Okay. Now he is aware that his own life is going. He can tell,
I'm worried about when Joseph related what happened to his father.
Yeah.
It must be
Trauma.
a very terrible experience to know that these boys lied all these years. I'm just trying to think when he looks at them for what they have done to him first, for all these years, and what they have done to this little, because to him, no matter he's up there, Prime Minister,
It's his little boy. His little munchkin, Joseph, son of his old age. So and basically that's how our children are to us. No matter how old they grow, you can still picture the rosy cheeks thing. Okay, I just thought, no. So now he is dying, are we together? And there's a certain level of consolation because he lived quite a few years in Egypt before he died. And he's thinking, you know what? And Joseph can tell. So he brings his sons for them to receive a blessing from Israel. And he gets more than he bargained for. The father says, you know what? These are no longer my grandsons. They are going to be your siblings. Because I'm counting them. The same way in which I count your oldest brothers, Reuben. In the same way in which Reuben and Simeon are mine. Your sons are mine. Are we together? And do you notice now when they get to the land of promise, this is what, who was in charge by that time? It is Joshua. And God had no problem because there's no way we find God saying, what are these little munchkins doing here? God is actually in alignment with it because this is all from the seed of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So they were included in this number because the grandfather said so. By that responsibility of being the head of his family. And God, remember, after he puts Adam in charge, he says, no, feel free, name all these animals, and whatever Adam named them, that's what they were called. Because as God saw him naming the animals, he realized he's already exercising his image, my image, in him. Okay. And as they are busy doing that, God says, yeah, I was expecting him to name him that. Yeah. Is that a rabbit? Yeah. He's got divine tendencies. So, Israel also decided, let me use my God-given. And he adopted these. He elevated them from grandchildren to his children. That's why we get them in that number. But if you notice, when you do that, they become 13. And yet he had 12 sons. Are we together? And this is where we now go to the book of Numbers. All right? I think this time is chapter 2. I don't think it's in chapter 1. But let me just double check. This topic is close to my heart as far as this foundation is concerned. To the point where if you woke me up from sleep, I can sort of, give you the references, because the first time I did this for myself, it settled in my brain. Yes, it settled. No, it is chapter 1. Okay. Let's read verse 47 and 48 to 49.
But the Levites, after the tribe of their fathers, were not numbered among them. For the Lord had spoken unto Moses, saying, only thou shalt not number the tribe of Levi, neither take the sum of them among the children of Israel. But thou shalt appoint the Levites over the tabernacle of testimony, and over all the vessels thereof, and over all things that belong to it. They shall bear the tabernacle and all the vessels thereof. And they shall minister unto it, and shall encamp round about it.
Let's pause right there. Whenever I'm dealing with the lessons on the sanctuary, especially that verse 50, they shall encamp around. If you remember, the sanctuary was in the middle of the camp. Then you had 3 tribes in the north, 3 tribes in the south, 3 tribes in the east. If you notice, we're still in the book of Revelation. 3 tribes in the west. Are we together? And then around the sanctuary was the tribe of Levi. And in my picture, remember, God is force. He is light. And he's actually destroying light. Whenever sin comes in, he consumes the sin. And here he chooses to have a residence among sinners. They were supposed to be incinerated almost immediately, but guess what he does? He puts an insulation around himself. Levi. The tribe of Levi. That's why we don't get them in the count. If you notice, when we sit here and we're using electricity, none of us ever bothers to actually appreciate that the electrical cable that brings in this electricity is insulated so that we are not consumed by the electricity.
Wow.
And that is why Levi is not in the account. But we still keep the number 12 because he had 12 sons. Are you following where I'm going with this? All right. Lastly, dealing now with Revelation chapter 7. Okay. Ephraim, if you go to the book of Judges, again, in the interest of time, because I want us to discuss. But those of you who are taking down these references, when you get home, please read those scriptures. It's a fascinating picture that you're going to get. In the book of Judges, now that they've settled in the land of, okay, some things begin to happen. The book of Judges is interesting. Several times in the book of Judges you hear, no, it was in the book of Judges where everybody did as they pleased. Okay. In other words, there was a certain element of lawlessness among a people who came from the lawgiver. Okay. Because you just did as your opinion saw fit. All right. And yet, they had the ark of the testimony in their midst, which actually said, you cannot be doing as you see fit. All right? Do things according to my will. All right? Okay. Let's highlight the tribe of Manasseh. You can actually have a seminar on those two subjects, but I'm just going to touch the highlights. It was during the time of this judge. I think it's Abimelech. Yeah. Was it Abimelech or Jephthah? It was Jephthah. Yeah, it was Jephthah. Jephthah features from chapter 12, in fact, chapter 10, verse 6. We're not going to be able to read everything, but you'll hear that the children of Israel did evil again in the eyes of the Lord. And then the Lord allowed, in this case, it was the Arameans, all right, and the Amorites, to defeat them and subject them to slavery, all right. Then he sent Jephthah to release them when they cried for help. He said, "Oh, help." He sent Jephthah. Are you together? Jephthah's story is another fascinating one. So, in this case, I'm not going to detour. You'll forgive me. I want us to picture what actually happened as Jephthah is organizing the armies to fight these people who are oppressing them. He needs to fight them. Are we together? He blows the trumpet. Remember, the trumpets blow the trumpet so that they come for war. The Ephraimites didn't come. Right? I'm summarizing the story, but now you're getting from chapter 12. And then God gave Jephthah resounding victory. They were victorious. Yeah. And now the Ephraimites realized, hey, people are now going to have a party. And we actually can't go to the party because we didn't participate in the work. But Jephthah was diplomatic enough to send an invitation to them. But now, in order to hide their shame, they say, "Why did you call us?" And he said, "No, I called you." They said, No, we need to fight you because you didn't call us," which was a lie. And Jephthah is saying, "But we are brothers." They said, "We are coming." Some of you have siblings, especially if you're boys to boys. And there are those few times where big brother is saying, no, don't bother me, and this little one wants to beat him up. Says, and this little brother of mine, but if I give him a clap, Mom is going to clap me. But this one is itching to beat the other one up. Basically, that's what happened. Little brother wants to beat up the big brothers. Are you together? Eventually, they were forced to defend themselves because they were actually murderers. They came with spears and swords to kill them. So a war broke out between the rest of Israel and Ephraim. Are you together? And ever since that time, if you follow the story of the children of Israel, the Ephraimites stayed like distant from all the holy things that were happening in Israel until they filtered out into nothingness. Do you notice how the story started? Okay. They were invited, come, because they are a brotherhood. They decided to separate themselves. And ever since they did that, based on the record in the book of Judges, you actually don't find them later on. It's like they just disappeared into nowhere. And I have an understanding that in the same way in which God is able to insert people into his lineage, like for example, are you actually appreciating that Ephraim and Manasseh were half Egyptian? But God includes them in the number, because at the end of the day, it's not a question of what race are you or what tribe are you. The question is, whom do you worship? This chapter of mixed race. And God co-opts them into his number. He's got no problem because they are willing. In other words, by virtue of being the sons of Joseph, they received the true gospel. Okay, so God includes them. But these, by virtue of separating themselves, God has to honor their decision to what? To live in his, even though he is sad about it. If we vote against God, he has to actually watch us walking away. Okay, with tears running. Remember the prodigal son, Luke chapter 15. Every day that father would wake up and he would check the road down where the son went. How do we know that? Because the day he appeared, the father was the first one to meet him, showing that he was doing that daily. Every day. He's hoping Ephraim is going to come back. In this case, Ephraim went permanently. And therefore, you are not going to find him in the record when Jesus is going to come again. Why would God include somebody who's going to be absent? But do you notice once again, in order to keep the number 12, because there's something significant about the number 12. That will be the last point I'm going to mention. The second from last is Dan. What happened to Dan? Again in the book of Judges, and Dan's story is even sadder than the one of Ephraim. Okay. Yeah, the book of Judges. I'm just going to give you the chapter just now. Chapter 17. Okay. Chapter 17 and 18 and 19. This is a very long story, but let me summarize it for you. That after they had settled in the different areas, some are in the north, some are in the south, the children of Israel are together. With the tribe of Dan, where they settled, they were kind of like distant from where the temple was at Shiloh. Are we together? So one day, a Levite who happened to live in their midst, remember the insulation, he is walking through. And the Danites are thinking, I think it's too far to go to the temple. They say, hey, Baba Mfundis, could you wait? Say what? Hey, we're thinking it's too far to go to church from here. Why don't we have church here with you? But the manner in which they were having church was corrupt, because they set up an idol, which is a breaking of the second commandment of the 10 commandments written by the finger of God in the ark in Shiloh.
Image of jealousy.
They set up an image of jealousy right in the tribe of Dan. And they said, we are going to return tithe, all of us here, to you. You minister to us. This is going to be our God. And the Levite, I think, he calculated, okay, if there are about, how many Danites? If there are about 60,000 of these guys, and took up the calculator, and each one of them is returning about, say, between 5 and 7, average 7,000 rand tithe, that's a lot of money. And he decided, you know what, I'm also not going to church. I'm going to sit here and receive these tithes, and we'll cook up this religion. And he settled in the tribe of Dan, and they began a competitive religion, rooted in idol worship. In the tribe of what? Dan. In Israel. Okay. If you notice, a Levite, that piece of insulation, decided not to do its work. It peeled away and exposed the people to raw electricity. And guess what happened? They were burnt. You don't get them in the account at the end. The tribe of Dan. I'm not going to touch the other part. Chapter 19 is a very ugly story. Are we together? It's similar. In other words, it's like a continuation of what happened in Sodom. Remember, when Lot said, hey, don't abuse my visitors, but you may abuse my daughters. And you wonder, what kind of love is this? We're a father, but probably it was just a gesture to show how abhorrent that habit of theirs was to him. But at the same time, as a father, if those men had acted on your wishes. But you remember, nothing happened to Lot's daughters because the angels, what? They closed off the door, they couldn't find the door until they left. But in the case of the story in Judges chapter 19, which happened within the tribe of Dan, are we together? This Levite allowed these men, are we together, to molest his concubine. He had a concubine, so they molested her the whole night. She actually died of rape. And when he woke up in the morning, he realized she was dead. He cut her into pieces. Some of you have read that story. And he sent each one of the pieces to the 12 tribes of Israel, like as a witness. How can we have such evil amongst the people called by God's name? Israel, the one who wrestles with Elohim. And you've got such a vile thing, a bad thing like that happening in Israel. And that's why you don't find them in the list, as far as I'm concerned, based on my Bible study. Are we together? But once again, after you take Ephraim out, you take Dan out, you remain with 10. So in order to retain the number 12, we put Levi in. Joseph is now represented twice because Manasseh is still there. Joseph is there. We are keeping the number 12. Why? My own understanding, because now we're going to discuss. Are we together? If Jacob hadn't inherited the weakness of lying and cheating, remember, the name Jacob means
Deceiver.
the sly guy, the guy who walks past you and he goes, hey, say. Not because he's just greeting you, but there's something underhanded that he wants to do with you behind the building. Jacob, that was his character. Are we together? Remember, that's what he did to the brother to get the birthright. So, oh, you want the birthright? You want the birthright, eh? And the brother said, hey man, I'm hungry. You can't be discussing birthright while I say, oh, okay, whoa. I know you're hungry. Why don't we have a transaction? Because it's clear this man can't think. Maybe that's one of the principles of health. Don't make fundamental decisions when you are very hungry. You will make a mistake. Serious mistake. So Esau decided, you know what? I prefer lentils to this birthright business. And the transaction was made out together. And now when Esau discovered, not only did he cheat me on that transaction, but when it was time for him to receive the blessing, if you notice, that's the same thing that Ephraim and Manasseh were going to receive from Israel, that blessing from dead before he passes away. Okay. Jacob again with the mother, what? Hey. And he got the blessing, and the brother missed out. The brother now wanted to murder him, to kill him outright. You remember that? Now, what happens? The mother, who was the one also with a gene of cheating. Hey, Jacob, huh? Did you follow how sin goes in our genes and we pass it on to our children? Okay. She makes the mistake of sending him to the uncle who was the chief cheat. And who's this? Jacob met his match.
Actually, he was going home.
Yes, he was just
Actually,
going.
he was going home
Exactly.
to the roots of weeds to find the master.
Exactly. Are you following this story? The issue about how Jacob went home. Okay. Now, in the manner in which Laban, the uncle, cheated Jacob, he was supposed to have had one wife, which is Rachel. Are we together? And based on God's design, do you notice that Sarah was barren? Notice that. Then Isaac married who? Rebecca. She was also barren. Do you notice that Rebecca was also barren? That was God's design. All the people were supposed to be the mothers in Jesus' line early on. We're all supposed to be barren because God always works on nothing in order to produce something divine. Amen. I don't know, some of you have noticed that. They were all barren. But now, because he began the note on a cheat note, God has to be suddenly democratic. Okay, this son of mine wants to be a cheat, at the same time he wants my blessing. Okay, let him receive the wages of cheating while I'm trying to organize his salvation. A Savior full of grace and truth. So the truth we're not going to deny, but there's grace waiting at the end. So he let him get the brunt of being cheated. So he ends up with what? 2 wives. Okay, and guess what? God has a sense of humor. You thought you were just going to end up with one. Well, it's time to receive your wages, and he's receiving them. Twice, yes. And the one that he does not love is the one who's producing children. Basically meaning the children of Israel were supposed to be 2. We now have 12 because of Jacob's sin of cheating. Are we together? And guess what God does? He covers Jacob by his grace. In other words, Jacob is the one who has sinned. The children that he produces because of his sin are innocent. They had nothing to do with it. God decides, no, even if they were supposed to be 2, now that they are 12, so much the better. Where sin abounded, grace abounded even the more.
Amen.
And we now have the 12 children of Israel out of a sorry story of somebody who actually began of sinning and cheating. And for me, I found that fascinating. How could God just collect all these children who are a product of one man's sin, a man who was supposed to have walked by God's grace and truth? And then you realize, no, God is gracious. He's not going to hold it against these other 10 children. Are we together? That they are now born because Jacob is a cheat. You follow what I'm saying? And so the first point to me when we're looking at the 144,000 is how God's grace is entirely the foundation of why we're eventually going to get the 144,000. We have those 144,000 because of God, not because of Israel, but because of God. Because as far as Israel was concerned, he was messing up. This is a mess. Because 12 children, in fact 13 of them running around, and each time you have to, hey, by the way, who's your mom? So go tell mom such and such. Are we together? And God is sitting there in heaven and he's thinking, oh, Papa, these are my children. Are we together? That grace element kicks in. It's true, this is a mess. What is even more true is God is willing to take our mess, as they often say, and make it a message.
Yeah.
All right? So here we've moved from the mess to the message. So when we get to part 2, we are now going to go deeper into what this symbolism is all about. Because if you notice clearly, these are not the literal biological children of who? Of Jacob. Clearly. Because if that were the case, we were supposed to have these 13. Clearly, I mean, that's clear. And that's the reason why I had to write up this and you